Would you like a fun way to learn a lot about gardening, all in one season and all in one bed? Well, it's a bit challenging, but it's something you can do. Join me today as I talk about growing a purple garden. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and right now you might be thinking, wait, what? Grow a purple garden? And that's going to teach me a lot about gardening? Well, absolutely. Now, you could choose any color to do this with, but I think in the vegetable garden, the color purple offers a few more challenges than some of the other colors that we might want to choose. And here's the idea. I've got a handful of seeds, and all of these plants produce purple fruit or purple roots. And so, by just taking everything I have that's purple and then deciding to put all of these plants into a single bed, it's going to force me to use just about everything I know about gardening to get a harvest from every single plant. And if you're unsure about how to do it, it really can become a challenge to figure out how to put all these plants together and grow them from seed. Let's go inside and I'll tell you specifically what the issues are. Normally, for the plants that you grow in your vegetable garden, I would encourage that you group plants together based on the needs of those plants. The nutrients, the light, the amount of water, when they're harvested. Those are all good things to think about when you're growing different plants close together in the same bed, because it's easy. You take care of all the plants the same way, and then you have success. But when you force yourself using something random like the color purple, these plants are going to have different needs, different requirements, which means we have to learn a lot about these plants and how they grow and how we're going to put them in our garden. That's why this is really an interesting exercise. And when you choose something like the color purple, as I did for my granddaughters, it's a great way to get the kids interested and involved with the garden as well. So let's look at these different plants, and you'll see what I mean as far as the differences between them. Let's begin with these diamond eggplant. I'll start them indoors 8 weeks before my last frost. I'll transplant after that, and then I can harvest about 2.5 months after that. These purple tomatillos, well, they'll be started 6 to 10 weeks before the last frost indoors, and I can expect to harvest about 3 months after I transplant them. This magenta sunset Swiss chard, well, I can actually start these outside 2 to 3 weeks before my last frost and be able to harvest about 30 days after that. These early purple Vienna kohlrabi, well, I can start these outside as well about 2 to 3 weeks before the last frost, but it's going to be about 2 months before harvest. This is a burgundy okra. Starting inside is about 4 to 6 weeks. I could go outside if I had a longer season. My season just isn't long enough. And it's going to be about 2 months after transplanting. Here's a sugar magnolia pea. And I'll start these 4 to 6 weeks before my last frost date outside. And I'll be able to harvest in about 2.5 months. This black nebula carrot can be started a couple weeks before the last frost date, but it'll be about 3 months before I harvest them. This basil can be started outside, but it needs to be after the last frost date when the soil has warmed up to the point that it doesn't fall below 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Or I can start them indoors 4 to 6 weeks before I put them outside. And then as soon as the leaves develop, I can harvest that. Here's a purple top white globe turnip. I can put these outside, but I need to wait until after the last frost date. And then it's going to be about 2 months before I harvest. I may be growing this Love Lies Bleeding amaranth as well. And this is one of those that I can start outside after the last frost, but it's going to be almost 3 months before I harvest. So you see the issue. Some of these need to be started indoors. Some of these can be started indoors. Some of these are sown outside a few weeks before the last frost date or after the last frost date, and the harvest times vary between 1 and 3 months. Another big issue is that these plants are going to be a lot of different sizes, from small plants to big plants. To begin this phase of the planning, I put together a list of the plants, the spacing, and how tall the plants are going to get. And these are both very important factors. For the most part, we can have our plants growing relatively close together. The carrots, the peas, the turnips, they're only a few inches apart. But as you might expect, the okra, the eggplant, and the tomatillo need some space to grow. So I've laid out a general outline of the bed that I'll be growing in, and I can figure out how I'm going to put the plants in this bed based on how much space they need to grow. But now there's another factor that enters into the picture. The peas, while they might only be growing 2 to 4 inches apart, the plant is going to grow as tall as 6 or 7 feet. The turnips, also close together, they might only be 12 inches high. The tomatillos need to be spaced about 2 feet apart. They're going to get 3 to 4 feet tall. So now as I figure out not only the spacing for the seeds and the size of the plant, I have to anticipate whether I need a trellis for some of these plants. And here's yet another level of gardening. If you haven't used trellises, well, this is an exercise in learning how to use trellises. And maybe even different sized trellises for different size plants. And so with the general spacing and height requirements figured out, now I can start thinking about where I'm going to put these individual plants in the bed. A very important factor as I begin is where the sun is. And so for me, this is south. The sun will be shining across the bed in this direction because this bed is oriented north-south. So I need to have my tallest plants on the north of the bed, farthest from the sun. So the peas will go on this end of the bed, and I need to anticipate some type of trellis that will run probably side to side, and I'll have peas growing on both sides of that trellis. The next tallest plant that I have to be concerned about is the tomatillo, followed by the okra. So I can put tomatillos here, and because they need a lot of space, I'll probably have one plant on each end of the bed to spread out. And I'll also have to anticipate some type of trellis to hold up these plants. The okra is also tall, but doesn't need trellising. So I'll have some individual okra plants in this general area, followed by the eggplant, which gets about 2 feet tall. And so they can support themselves, and they also need to be spaced about 1.5 to 2 feet apart. So I can probably squeeze in with no problem 4 eggplants that can support themselves. And then as far as the spacing is concerned, the chard and the kohlrabi at about 6 to 8 inches apart, and they're not too tall. I can go ahead and put some chard in here, and I'll put some kohlrabi in here. Let's not forget that these are the eggplants. And so they can be spaced a little bit closer together. And this is just a rough idea at this point. just getting a general idea of how I'm going to put these plants. I can grow some basil throughout the bed, but I'll go ahead and put some basil plants pretty close together. And let's do a couple rows of basil and a couple rows of turnip. And then we can put in a whole bunch of carrots. And so this whole bottom space will be carrots that are all about 2 to 3 inches apart once I put them in the ground and they're thinned out. And so I have the beginnings of a plan, and it actually looks like this is going to work. But remember that the planting times and the seed starting times of these plants vary by a couple months, depending on whether I'm starting indoors or starting outdoors. So that's why I've got 2 of my beds laid out, because the next phase is to try to figure out when I'm going to put these seeds or plants in the bed, and then also when I can expect a harvest of these plants. My last frost date is May 18th, and all of the seed sowing is based around that date. So now I have an actual plan of when I'm going to sow the seeds, either outside or indoors, and when I can expect a harvest of all the different plants. And so our plan is really starting to come together. I know what plants I'm going to grow, the purple ones. I have a pretty good idea of where they're going to go in the bed, and I have a very good idea of when I'm going to start the seeds based on my last frost date. Now I can start incorporating the methods of gardening that will really make this happen. The first one of those is square foot gardening. Now, in square foot gardening, we break our bed down into a grid, and each of the squares in that grid is 1 foot by 1 foot in size. So by having a grid on the bed, the next phase will be to figure out just exactly which of these plants will go into each of those squares. It's a pretty effective and easy way to figure out the actual sowing and planting in this bed. And if I think about it, as I look through these dates, I recognize there's going to be a lot of bare spots in the garden at different times. Some of these seeds are going to go in a full month before the plants go in. And then once I harvest, there's going to be a bare spot where those plants were. Now we can start thinking about succession planting. Now, in succession planting, we can do this a couple different ways. I can sow the carrots or the turnips in particular and give them a space of about 2 weeks between sowing. So I'll sow some seeds, wait 2 weeks, sow some more seeds, wait 2 weeks, sow some more seeds. And that way there are plants growing throughout the season, and I'll be harvesting over a period of weeks. Or I can just wait till the harvest. As I look at the dates, I notice that I'll be harvesting the okra on about July 22nd. I'll be harvesting the kohlrabi on July 22nd, and I'll be harvesting the turnips on July 22nd. Well, rather than leaving those sections of the bed empty, now we can start thinking about a fall garden and putting in seeds to fill in those space. It can be the same seeds. I can try growing more of the chard or the carrots or whatever the plant happens to be. Or now I could bring in something totally new. Ideally, it would still be purple. But the idea is that we can keep growing in this bed throughout the entire season. And I haven't started any seeds yet, so there's still a lot of flexibility in this plan and in the plant selection. Last year, I grew a great purple potato. So as I look at this, I may decide instead of the okra or the eggplants, maybe I'll put in some of those purple potatoes. There are a lot of other varieties of plants that are purple that I might discover between now and then, or I may find out that I have some seeds I want to use. Don't feel like this is the only time you can sit down and develop a plan, and it has to stay this plan. Be flexible as you continue. And even after I put some of the seeds in the ground, I may decide that I want more rows of okra and fewer eggplants, or maybe I won't put the basil in, and instead of rows, I can put the basil in the 4 corners. You can be creative, you can be flexible, and as I mentioned earlier, get the kids involved. Because last year I had a purple garden and I grew purple beans, the purple okra, the purple kohlrabi, and purple potatoes. And my granddaughters were involved with some of the sowing and some of the harvest, which made them an integral part of my purple bed. I fully anticipate they're going to be involved again this year. Purple's my color of choice, and you can see all of the different aspects that go into the planning, and planning is a critical part of it. Pick a color, pick your plants, start a bed, and then start learning how to incorporate all of these other gardening ideas that need to enter into the plan, and then actually go out and make it happen. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.